All right, hey everybody, welcome to Dialog Choices podcast. Again, no one can stop us. That's proven endlessly true. People keep showing up in throngs to stop us. They write signs like "Stop this podcast." It's unstoppable. This train has no.
I keep seeing signs. Yeah, every time I go in
or train.
Every time I go out for a drive, it's like signs everywhere. Stop, just yield and things. It's just we don't give up.
I'm here once again with I'm Keith, and I'm here once again with Andrew and Colonel RPG.
Hey.
Yes.
Very good. we have special guest GoldVision with us this week. How would you like to introduce yourself?
How's it going? GoldVision's fine. It makes more sense with consistency across the internet.
Yeah. Is there like a way that you would introduce like your channel?
Oh, I'd say, hello, my name is GoldVision. But I guess I'd say it weird.
I mean, sorry, I meant like...
you don't have to say it that way.
Like what you think of your channel is what I mean. Like your what your intro
as like
would be.
A formal introduction. Yeah, I guess my name's GoldVision, and I play video games, and I try not to attack anybody.
How's that going?
It's been a ride. It's a lot of effort, a lot more effort than I thought it would be. And it started off as a joke, and then it's just kind of evolved and taken its own spirit. And I feel like I'm more along for the ride at this point than anything else.
It just it transcended into just like a fact as opposed to a game or a rule.
Yeah. It kicked off in Grand Theft Auto. I was trying to make a series called Grand Theft Auto Pacifist about just kind of having a perspective of somebody who would jump into that game and not want to attack anybody.
It's a fantastic series too.
This game could be played, or see how far you could get without doing what the game told you to. And it ended up becoming like this very deep introspective look at how I play video games. And then the bigger thing that happened was people started recognizing me in Grand Theft Auto and then in other games and kind of expecting certain things from me from that perspective. They expected me to be nonviolent. And then whenever I would do a live stream or any kind of other game, people would be surprised that I would attack people in maybe a Counter-Strike or something else. So eventually it just became something that I wanted to pursue. And there were a couple key moments, if you're interested, that kind of really triggered the whole thing.
Kind of fascinating, yeah, because you're like, in a way, you were kind of playing a character for like a YouTube series, but then that sort of started taking over outside of that series, and it started spreading. Partly because people wanted it, and partly because you wanted it. Yeah,
it was an idea bigger than me, and I didn't realize it at the time. And then I feel more of an obligation to do it right than just to kind of explore and mess around with it, which makes it heavier and then more difficult kind of across all platforms. There was the biggest key moment was when I did a live stream of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and I landed on the ground as you do. It's Battle Royale. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. And I landed on the ground, I found a shotgun, and I could see somebody in a house. And I was like, I got to apologize to the people watching right now for what's probably going to happen. And I stood outside the door, and as the person inside the house came out, I fired the shotgun twice. And it felt like the air got sucked out of the room in the chat. And it was this, I had like an actual physical reaction to it. And I don't think it's like a universal thing. I think it's a particular expectation that's been placed on me as I play games. And I feel like I've become something of a representative of nonviolence in games and the exploration that comes from that. So that kind of physical pain that I experienced was something that stuck with me for days. And it was really just a need to decide what I was going to do about playing games in that perspective. Either separate myself from the idea entirely or and have continued to embrace it. So I haven't made any like formal declarations that I swear I will never attack anybody or anything like that makes it into a kind of formal
like
experience.
The observable trend and like growing expectation.
It's very difficult. It's actually very difficult to be completely nonviolent in a lot of games. And I've gone so far as to try to be non-destructive entirely. But then that kind of kicks you. Like I was at the point where I would open Google Docs and I wouldn't delete characters. I would continue to type, and then I wouldn't, there were letters that I didn't want to use, I would move the cursor and type them away and then press enter enough that it would go down. And it was just, it kept going. I wanted to take it as far as I could find, as far as I could.
Like any document that you wrote would like it would start with like a letter or like whatever, like the content of what you'd written. And then if you just kept scrolling, it would start looking like the far lands of Minecraft, where it becomes increasingly incoherent and noisy until it's just random punctuation.
It's a perfect visual metaphor for that. And that wasn't a declaration. Once again, I wasn't saying I was going to be non-destructive no matter what. It was an exploration of what it means and what the value of these behaviors is. Because I don't think universally video games should be nonviolent. I don't think that there's like this moral or ethical standard that says that no video game should have violence in it. I think that's almost absurd, honestly, borderline censorship and the refusal to explore ideas in those directions. Because there's so many opportunities in video games to do so many interesting and non-traditional things.
It cuts off so many verbs.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about narratives, I feel like the tension that is inherent to violence in general. Like there's and that's even without considering that there are multiple types of violence, which I'm sure Gold
like there's so many, there's like a whole spectrum of what could be considered violence, but also like
absolutely,
it's an entire medium defined by its interactivity. So cutting off a huge percentage of the verbs entirely is like not the right move either. But I think about like, because I bring this up every now and then during certain playthroughs or game types, just, and it kind of comes up when you just kind of play something that's just fundamentally different, like Return of the Obra Dinn or Papers, Please, or just when you play something that questions the role of violence, like Undertale or Pathologic to some extent, where I just bring up this question during playthroughs sometimes of like, isn't it strange how for a huge percentage of video games, violence is just the assumed default. And like, there's just like, it's not that having violence hobbles video games, but that video games can go further by not just assuming violence.
I think of them as violence only games, where the only solution to get to the next room or complete the task is to destroy something or someone. And I think that it reduces the creative solutions in any particular narrative to limit the player by preventing them from exploring any kind of action that they would otherwise normally be able to conduct, like breaking down a door instead of killing somebody who drops the key. That kind of.
That's why asking the question is so powerful as well, because it's not about, it's as you're saying, like it's not necessarily about making a statement about the video games in general. It's just raising the question itself is powerful enough that it allows you to see things with a different perspective.
It definitely changes a lot of the perspectives of the games I play, but it also really restricts them. I got Borderlands 3, and I was going to just go as far as I could, and I got to the first gate entrance, and it's just kind of a brawling room that you have to take everybody out in with security cameras, and clearly it's just a series of kill walls, like firewalls that you have to bust through. And since I wasn't willing to do that, I had to stop playing pretty much right out of the gate. And then there's other games that are more open world that are more attractive for this principle, because as soon as you can get into that open world, you can wander and then pursue your own goals. And it becomes much more existential in open world games because they're often so open-ended with their goals. Like there might be a series of initial tasks that they'll give you, that the narrators will give you, the programmers. But after that, the game doesn't necessarily have an ending. There's beginning and endings of different quests chains and task chains, but essentially you're the character and you can do whatever you want to. And that has also led me to be more of an experiential gamer, as I consider it, where my goal is more to have positive and good experiences in a game than to be objectively measured in my successes in those games. I would rather have a fun experience in a virtual reality game for 5 minutes than spend 20 minutes doing something I didn't enjoy and then being told I won, for example. And that perspective is fair. It's not, I don't think it's completely relatable. And I also feel like I've been walking the path in almost solitude. Then I try to like make a video, express it to people, but it feels so distant from the traditional way that people play games. And it's definitely not a path that I'm advocating for until I get somewhere that is clearly meaningful and clear. But it's definitely changed the way that I play games and has opened up just a lot more questions about why I do anything. And what the meaning of experience is.
Desperately try to get past the first mission of Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
That was my
did not go well.
Which I imagine you hoped that you could get to the open world before you had mandatory violence. So you could like wander around in it, and that's not what happens.
Yeah.
You are in the open world at the beginning, but I do that first mission with kind of a hope that I'll just get to the city, to Night City, and then be able to do it. I was actually more discouraged by that tree bug from the driver issue that placed trees all over the world. That made me think it was less important to explore the outside world, and also trusting the.
Did you get the tree bug?
Yeah.
Oh, you did get the tree bug.
Not the tiny tree bugs,
I've heard of that.
It's, I don't know why it happened, but
it's
I updated the drivers and it seemed to go away. But it really...
Oh, I see. You're driving around the countryside and every shrub seemingly from across the entire landscape is rendering like on a higher
RTX
Photoshop layer than the rest of the world, basically.
Yeah,
it's really weird.
You have X-ray vision, but only for small shrubs that are in the far distance.
It's shrub vision.
I wondered about that. Like, if you were able to get past the violence in the beginning, would you have gone a no anything route? Like, you would have not even knocked out a person?
It's a series of lines. I like to think about it. Like, try not to take anything that's not mine. Try not to destroy anything, and then you keep stepping it up. And then definitely never crossing the line of killing somebody. There was a news article last year about how the game was promising that you could complete it without killing anybody. And that seems kind of open-ended anyway, because of Cyberpunk's conceit of how everybody's kind of digitized in a way. So is it really murder? But when you, even when conflict happens in that first mission, if people fall over, then they're still alive, even though they've been shot a bunch of times, and they're just kind of writhing. And so then technically they're not dead. And so technically it's like a no kill kind of experience, but that goes against my desire to not attack anybody. And so I want to get past that part without without attacking anybody if possible. And that's the perspective that keeps going. And I touched on this a little bit before about how I feel like games are evolving. And when you buy a game or you invest in one or you keep paying into one, you're supporting the developers who are then building the next iteration of that game. And if they don't hear the voice of people who are pursuing this kind of gameplay, then they won't investigate it, while at the same time, because these narratives are so fluid and so subject to change, I feel like developers could address these situations and make them possible to be completed in more nonviolence and more interesting perspectives.
So let me get this straight. They announced that Cyberpunk 2077 was supposed to be finished without killing anybody?
It not supposed to be, but
Or,
it was
sorry,
finishable. Yeah,
finishable like that. Huh, man, that feels like almost dishonest, really, because
well, they did.
especially coming from
they did like a couple weeks ago say that the game works surprisingly well on last gen consoles, and then it came out. And
surprisingly
been pulled from the Sony store. So,
my God,
there's been a few layers of dishonesty.
I'm asking this because the that's true, yeah. But I'm asking
I
this.
don't think that's.
The good news
I don't think
is
you could call it dishonesty. They just lied. Like it's just lying.
Well, yeah,
like, you can't.
dishonesty is a slightly nicer version, maybe perhaps dishonest way of saying lie.
Yeah, no, they flat out lied. There's no like you can't. Yeah, there's no nice way to say like, "Oops, we lied to you."
But what
the good news
what
is
Gold is saying is that. Sorry, go ahead.
The good news is the GoldVision has it on PC, so there will be the inevitable Fallout 3 and New Vegas style skip the intro mod that'll let him just be in the open world, but then he'll just be disappointed by
by the rest of the game.
The reality of Cyberpunk's open world. I did try to film an episode that was just engaging with the open world and just wandering and not chasing objectives the whole time, and it's not much of a simulation. It does not compare favorably to the 7-year-old Grand Theft Auto 5.
And so the reason I asked that was because if you knock people out, like if you knock someone out and try to hide the body so that way no one else notices, the bin consumes them. As in, like, they aren't there anymore. It just despawns them from the world. I mean, you can keep throwing people into the same bin, and it's empty every time you throw them in it. And so that's why I was curious. Like, if you knock someone out and throw them away, you killed them. They stop existing in this world.
It's like
that's
if you
the
trust
slippery slope too.
Yeah.
That's the same thing with like voting in Among Us or any kind of slight
existing in
movement
Among Us
in that direction. You can't trust the game systems to be consistent with the reality that we're familiar with. And so maybe, sure, I press this button and this guy goes away for a second, but now they're completely gone. They've been removed from the game and I crossed the line I didn't want to. Not because I was trying to kill them, but because the game system's inconsistent. So I have to kind of play it real soft and real, like any kind of like mandatory violent game that I play with different groups of people. I'm always afraid I'll step on a tile or something on the ground that will activate something that'll blow up. Yeah. And for most players, they're like, thankfully, I don't have to attack this person now. I've watched this whole thing happen. But for me, it's the antithesis of what I'm trying to achieve. So I have to
cause and effect.
Play the backfield and cautiously progress through these games and explore what the different things that they have to offer. And it's much more of like an aesthetic examination to see things, and it's a much slower pace, but then it becomes much more about appreciating the art as it's presented instead of kind of blasting through objectives and getting to the end as I normally played games in the past. So there's a big contrast there of just trying to avoid accidentally doing damage. It's often ends up being harder than
I asked about Cyberpunk like advertising the non-violent path, because RPGs have a relatively old tradition of allowing for that. Computer RPGs. I don't know if you've ever played the original Fallout, Gold?
Not the original. The top-down one?
Yeah, I'm talking. Yeah, the original. The first two Fallouts were top-down, and the first one in specific, you could finish without actually fighting in combat. But obviously, the lines of violence and the lines of being aggressive and causing somebody's demise were still crossed. It's very much a violent world, and I mean, there's the world's at stake and all that. But there's also the other side, which is what you're saying about Cyberpunk. It seems like it's the Deus Ex sort of approach where you shoot people with tranquilizer darts instead of bullets, but they effectively die anyway, in the sense of that they can't get revived because they're gone effectively. In the newer Deus Exes, they actually can get revived if their companions go there. So the mechanics change a little bit. But I feel like that's what Cyberpunk did, is just, you don't really kill them. It's green blood instead of red, sort of.
Trust us, they're fine.
Sure.
Asterisk.
Yeah, technically, technically. So that, yeah, it becomes more about the experience than trying to walk away from the game performance, feeling like I did my best effort to advance the narrative, be part of it, but also not just fall into the obligations of it if they cross lines that I don't want to. And that it becomes interesting enough to do pretty much in most games, although a lot of them I don't get very far, and a lot of them I need other players to take over. I've tried that. I tried that with Spider-Man. Yeah,
a non-violent playthrough of Spider-Man.
It was a non-killing one. I felt like it was okay to shoot webs at people and stick them to walls when they were armed people, like reducing the violence of the system, and then not hurting them because it would never hurt them health bar wise. So on the game's own terms, I could shoot spider webs attached. And so I spent all my, spec points just upping the power of the webs and then attaching people to all kinds of walls.
Like a crowd control playthrough of Spider-Man.
Yeah, and that was it. And once they all got attached to the walls, then they were no longer triggers in the game world. So you could complete all the missions, most of the missions. Okay. And so for the few missions that you had to, it was just boss battles, I handed the controller over to somebody else to advance the narrative. And I don't think that technically counts as a full pacifist run, because you still have to. It's these
because you're finding a way to
of the
opt
narrative.
out of parts of the game.
Yeah, like choosing not to play it. And to your point of mods, Keith, I still don't know how I even feel about that, because there's a part of me that thinks if a game is kind of just a series of art museums that you get to walk through and triggers that you get to experience, and I don't want to attack people in a game, could I just download or modify the game so that way I can unlock all those doors, experience the whole world, open the doors in Borderlands, and get to do everything and be everywhere without falling into the obligations of the narrative that are seemingly arbitrary? And that's where it seems like, in theory, I should do that, so that way I can enjoy the whole game without without attacking anybody, because that's the aspiration. But it doesn't sound right for some reason.
Possibly, that's where I wasn't so much thinking about how to beat the game so much as just being able to skip to the open world and kind of wander around in it without having to be blocked from the entire open world, and being able to wander in it by like a 1 hour mandatory story intro that those games infamously have. But it probably wouldn't be a solution beyond that.
The Grand Theft Auto has that for a while, like it would update and then it would reset the single player, which it would force you to complete to get online.
Holy crap.
Yeah. And so it happened once, and I had somebody else do it for me, play the tutorial, because there's just a part where you have to kill a security guard, and the game freezes like, this is where you learn how to use a firearm in this game, and this is the person you learn it on. And if you just kind of fire it into the air, because it freezes your character's movement. If you fire it and miss the guy, then he shoots you. And if you shoot him in the gun, it kills him. And so it's really just this mandatory forced experience. And so I've since then saved the save state of that game so I could copy it back over
every time they reset your progress.
Because I played single player Grand Theft Auto probably 30 hours, the original, back when.
I think I played it normal. I think I just about completed it. I was like in the process of doing all the stunt jumps. Like I was that far down the list.
Oh.
I got really far, but I got to a point where it was just like very complicated missions, and they wanted me to drive all over Los Santos, and the multiplayer was coming out, and I was not interested in like the traffic for some reason. It was too close to home to like come home from work after like a week of driving in hour-long commutes, and then just saying, okay, you need to drive to the valley to go pick up some computer parts. I'm like, I just did that. So I'm gonna explore other things. And I think that's the other thing about the exploration, the experiential part, is that so many games now, and I was never great about it to begin with, but a lot of games don't get played to completion. And so if you don't have that completionist perspective, which thankfully I don't, because it feels like it would be very hard to have that kind of OCD need to get all the achievements and everything. But if you don't have that, then the joy comes from doing what you want to in the game world. And then that just becomes an exploration of what is important to you. What experiences do you want? And then from that perspective, are developers creating the games that are based on the things that we want to do? And can they do that better if we highlight what we like to do and what we're trying to do and what's important to us, rather than just following along in the little book that they wrote? A little 3D museum version of it.
Do you ever feel that the fact that you make videos of your experience changes your, not necessarily your choices or maybe your choices, but it changes how you experience the games? The fact that you're on camera, the fact that you're recording?
I think that I think people should record their gameplay and just watch it back and just understand themselves better. I know that I really think that I noticed it more in the past. When I would first start to do it, I was like just watching it down. It's like, why did I go that way? I knew I had gone the right way several times before, and now I'm just I'm completely derailed. I'm in the wrong place. This is not interesting to me to have gone this way. And so then I catch myself when I play now and try to focus on doing the things that are optimized and most interesting and most aligned and harmonious with the behaviors that I want to have done. And so I think it definitely changes my gameplay perspective. And then to make videos about it, it definitely allows for a lot of comedy to look back at what I did and just say, wow, it was such a misstep. It's just hilarious. And then go after myself with jokes about just how badly I decided to move in whatever direction it was. But I think it's important to, you can get lost in your own mind and then just be in a place that you don't want to be. So it definitely turns on a lot of buttons in your head about paying attention to what's important in games, which I think improves your gameplay experience to go back and see it all.
I've been agonizing over Autopilot a little bit lately, because it's always a thing constantly just doing Let's Plays and whatnot. Like, you constantly will just kind of take actions and make moves just because it's time to keep going. It's time to keep the video going and all that. But
absolutely,
significantly worse is that I've been playing in Overwatch. My main has kind of become Lucio, and he has like autopilot mechanics, and that he just will like attach to a wall and just move, and he'll continue going. And so like I have all these moments where I'm like, I know not to do that. Why did I do that? Because the ability to be conscious of every moment of every gameplay, every moment of gameplay for continuous sessions is like really difficult without just falling into just automatically doing something and then making a big mistake and so on.
Absolutely. Definitely live streaming has a different perspective in that same way, where you want to make sure that it's interesting. Even if you're playing with somebody who's just watching, you want to keep going, you want to get to that next place, and so you might spend less time customizing your character or doing something that you might want to just sit there and learn about some system in the game, but you don't have the time for it.
Oh yeah.
And so you can't be doing that and spend 20 minutes just going through menus looking at all the different things that you might someday explore. You have to focus on.
Do I carefully read this lore and tutorials and then be told that that's boring? Or do I not read them and then be told that it was right there? Why didn't you read it?
It's funny because for me, it's the opposite. Live streams are where I basically waste time and just ramble about things that I shouldn't be rambling about. And then on the Let's Plays that I do, that's where I'm like most conscious about what is interesting for a viewer, what kind of people, because people watch videos also with different people watch videos with different objectives. Some want to watch the game, others want to be engaged, and so you have to please all of them at the same time,
or as many as you can.
Oh yeah, obviously striking the middle ground or something. It's I noticed I haven't watched many of your videos, Gold. I did watch the Cyberpunk one, and you record with another person. Jen, is it?
Yes.
So I think when you say that you find it funny and humorous to go back and rewatch stuff, does that play? Is that part of the reason why? Because it's a multiplayer, or do you record many multiplayer sessions? Not multiplayer.
That was actually maybe one or two I've done with Jen. I often do it by myself, but it's nice to have somebody to bounce off of. I feel like I was saying earlier, the kind of obligation to maintain the nonviolence and the non-destructive choices. It feels better to have somebody to bounce ideas off of. That way I don't get trapped in my head. Just because, like I said, it feels like I'm kind of walking this journey alone. I don't know a lot of other people. I looked up to see if anybody else was doing a pacifist run for Cyberpunk. And somebody did say...
Or a pacifist run YouTube channel.
It says pacifist, but it's the word fist. And they said they're punching everyone. And so it's kind of fun. It's kind of funny. But it's just not... It's not what... Yeah, it's a different thing.
Deceptive.
I call my fist the pacifiers.
That's fun, and it's a different thing, but because there's the obligation.
English.
Yeah.
Did you have a question a minute ago, Andrew?
About?
I thought you tried to cut in a moment ago, so I tried to remember.
Oh no, there's just when I think back to the way I play games, I play them more as I'm a passing deity. So I am a god. Everything that happens is my will and desire. No one can stop me because that is what I have decided, and no one has the power to because I am the player. And so I have too much authority over any universe. So if someone comes to me, Outer Worlds was a great example of oh, but think of no, I don't have to think of anything. This isn't my world. This is your problem, and I can just blast my way through everything, do whatever I want, and then just leave it behind because there's nothing to stop me from doing it. And so all of my decisions are selfish and based completely on what I want. And there's Cyberpunk's a good example where someone's oh, I do this horrible thing, but I'm going to give this to you so that way you can help someone else. I'm okay, yeah, but you still did a horrible thing, and I just blow their brains out and move on. It's yeah, but they gave you the thing. It's yeah, but I decided that I didn't think that was good enough. And
I really like
the thing
that word, passing deity.
Yeah, and the thing I don't.
Sorry, I just really liked
it. And the thing I don't like the most is actually when games hinder me from doing that.
Games where people you can't just decide to shoot somebody, for example.
Yeah, there was actually a really Cyberpunk is another good example where there was somebody doing something that I was really, really upset about, and the game wouldn't let me do anything to them. The game was no, you can't shoot them. And I'm what? What? They are literally making me uncomfortable. Let me shoot them. It's that's the whole...
Were you playing a Bethesda game?
They do tend to do that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's
annoy you
I don't know.
And not allowed to kill them.
It's weird. It's just weird to me, when you have this, when some games will throw out this sense of freedom, and then you go and okay, well, let's test that. And it goes, okay, well, freedom with an asterisk. And it's no, that's not freedom then. You just, it's still...
that's the kind of funny thing is that you both, because despite those being 2 points of views that sound completely contrary to each other, they're both basically just asking for games to have more options and more features and more freedom, which in many cases, especially these RPGs and open world games, just would make them better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have massively divergent playthroughs. In fact, in many cases, that's what they're essentially promising, and then we find out each time when they come out whether or not that promise was met.
I think
it definitely seems harder to do than
I don't know if it's
in
necessarily
anticipate.
very hard, because it's about thinking narratives just in a different perspective. Like, I don't personally have the experience of being a dungeon master or a game master in a tabletop role playing game, but I think it's the same problem that many dungeon masters have when they make their stories for tabletop. Is that they make this?
Oh my god, is that the
series
final
of-
form? A GoldVision tabletop RPG character?
No, what I'm saying is, like, in terms of how difficult it is, if you think a story like in a movie where there has a beginning, an end and end, and you have like all these story beats that you need to go through. Obviously, it's going to be always a compromise in a video game, because you can't have like a full tabletop, like all dynamic real world simulation situation. But the story can still be detached enough from those story beats that allows the player to have their own understanding of what is going on, whether you're trying to approach it from a passing deity perspective or from some more conservation and preservation of life and non-violence and all this sort of stuff. And RPGs really lend themselves to that, because there's so many moral quandaries inherently attached to the stories that they are told, that you're allowed to, even by saying the same thing, two characters can say the same thing, but just because we have a different perspective of what we're trying to say, even if it's the same sentence, the same dialogue option, or the same action, it doesn't matter. The meaning behind that can be different depending on your perspective. What I think happens with RPGs, especially AAA RPGs, is that they try to go for like these big stories and these big more morals, and just like, oh, the world is being saved or everything. And I finished Mass Effect for the third time today. The first Mass Effect.
Holy
I haven't played
crap.
it in a long time, and I finished it now. And there's like this big ending bit that is it's a choice that the player makes. I'm not going to spoil it. But it has to do with the basically galactic government. And the game has this very narrow understanding of what the council, this galactic government thing that Mass Effect has. It has this very narrow understanding of what the council is, and because the developers really didn't care for allowing the player to have their own understanding of what the council is, they just have your character say the things that the developers thought the council was, and so my choices basically get decontextualized simply because the developer wanted to tell their own story, and instead of allowing the player to just make up the context.
Sure. It's that forced narrative.
Yeah.
It's part of why, in a weird way, Western RPGs are one of my favorite genres, is because it's like a whole genre that has decided to like pursue the impossible task of basically making D&D in a video game. Like they're trying they have different approaches of what that means to them, but they're all different. Like, how do we do the impossible thing of pre-scripting a thing that's about you making up your own reactions from scratch, essentially, and what that means? And for a large number of them, it often just amounted to, well, you can attack things, and when you kill enough things, a number goes up, and then you get to pick where some of the numbers go. And then you get to pick the good or bad options and some dialogue sometimes. But then we're getting really interesting expressions of those mechanical sets with games like Pathologic, Disco Elysium, and Pyre, where they go in a massively divergent direction, where they start figuring out, like, okay, how do we make the gameplay part of the role-playing choices? How do we make failure a story branch? And how do we add as much depth as possible to the actual process of thinking and talking, as opposed to just picking the good or bad options, or the charm option if you have enough charm points, and that whole process, and then attacking that from the opposite side is the pure physical mechanics approach to that kind of role playing, which is like the Looking Glass style games, the 0451 games like BioShock and Prey are all trying to figure out, like, how do we let this intense level of role-playing freedom or invention or problem-solving leak into our mechanics by just giving the player enough sandbox tricks or special things to let them just start doing crazy things that we didn't even mean for them to do as their solutions. And the perfect game is like a Disco Elysium Prey, where like it's got all the depth on the mechanics and all the depth on the storytelling and character moments and like your inner world, and that will never happen, but I'll keep watching them try.
Fallout, the original Fallout, honestly, and Fallout 2 as well, to a degree, approaches that the most of any game that I know. Because there are games that do allow you to have a large degree of mechanical freedom in the game, not just because of the exploration aspect and the interaction with the world, but also allowing you, specifically in regards to, abstaining from combat or just fighting in different ways. But at the same time, it's just so focused on the exploration of little storylines and little side quests. It's really quite something. I like, obviously it's a very old game, but I think you mentioned when you were talking about how computer role-playing games try to be basically the tabletop experience of D&D and other tabletop RPGs, but in a computer form. That's very much the case, obviously, but it's also, I think, the fact that you have games like Diablo and oh
yeah, that's why I refuse to call those RPGs.
The thing is, those exist because there's a big contingency of people, or a big contingent of people. Yeah,
the worst people to play D&D with.
But there's a big I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have that experience, but and certainly didn't have that perception. But there's a lot of people that play RPGs, tabletop role playing games. I mean, to just to level up and just be as they'll engage with the role playing, but they're first and foremost about how good their character is at combat and how they can exploit.
Leveling up.
I've told the story in some context, but I'll mention it here too. Is like we played Vampire the Masquerade. It only lasted like a session or two, and I got all into my character of like I took the I used like the Beast race. That's the same one that I used in the video game when I would later play that. And I like layered on all of these different flaws, and was fascinated by the fact that you could like take flaws optionally, and they gave you upsides, but like I took some severe ones to the point where like I literally would have to be some kind of like masked wanderer because I couldn't even pass the masquerade in person all the time. Like I always looked non-passing, and would only get less passing every time I like hulked out. It would have permanent effects on my appearance and so on. And like I was all interested in seeing the potential of that on a role-playing perspective and how that would play out in scenarios and like the disguises and things. But then I have these two people in our party that are just murder hobos. So like at one point Sid drops us in this suburban neighborhood at nighttime because vampires and all that, and we're like seeking some kind of information or looking for something. But like what Jake and Ben do is they just knock down the first door they see and like kill everyone inside, and like a burning person comes screaming out and stuff like that. And I'm just like, I'm so confused, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening right now. And I'm realizing like, oh, they're seeing this as like a Diablo level. Like they're on a map, you go around and just click on everything, you loot all the objects and kill all the things that aren't you. And that's just they didn't even think to not think of it that way. But I'm like, it's just a suburban neighborhood at night, and this is the vampire game where you're supposed to not blow the masquerade that vampires exist. And they're just like mass murdering a suburban neighborhood. And I'm like, oh, we've fundamentally had a different understanding of what these are as games. And it's a pretty miserable setting to roleplay in because it's nothing interesting happens. It's just grinding and min-maxing.
Oh yeah, you mean a setting as in people?
And like D&D is the slowest, most boring way to grind and min-max. Like you might as well just go play a video game because it does the math for you.
And that's the thing. Like that's why that's a large part of Western RPGs are that, and certainly most JRPGs are that as well. Is that it is games and a way to satisfy that need for people to min-max and to level up and to look at new
really feel
items.
that progress.
Yeah. And
it's
that's
really,
I think that's
virtuous cycle.
The fact that those people exist, it shapes the genre as a whole, and has shaped the genre
Absolutely.
as a whole.
Absolutely.
How many layered progression systems can we tell you are doing something at the same time? It's part of the reason why every open world game or every like completely non-RPG style game now has RPG mechanics. And one of the next versions of that is not just loot, but crafting systems, because you feel like you're constantly making some kind of progress or getting rewards if you're just picking up items all the time. And like, for example, Ghost of Tsushima was really guilty of this, of just like, you just kind of mindlessly pick up like, oh, I got some iron or whatever on my samurai adventure. And like, you don't really know, like those have the opposite effect on me. Like I was really sad.
Yeah.
I was really sad when I played Skyward Sword, because, and overall I think Skyward Sword's fine. Like its flack is weird that it gets, it's a little overblown. But in Zelda games, specifically, they're not modern open world games, that you don't pick up an iron and then find out later why you care about that, or if ever, which maybe in some games you amass resources for 20 hours and then it never actually mattered, and you're like, I don't know why I kept picking things up, but there was glue and it said I could pick it up. But in Zelda games, it's like, I got the hook shot, I got a heart piece, and like it's so concrete in what kind of progress you're making. And you immediately know what it does. You're like, oh, I got a new device that does something that nothing else did before, or I literally got a bigger health bar in a game where that thing can just go, and so you really value the health bar whenever it goes up, and those little hearts pop up.
That's definitely sorry.
And like Skyward Sword abstracting that into like, I got a beetle, I got there's like a. It's like a regular skull, and then there's like a gold skull, and I think I need 3 tumbleweeds and a piece of glue to add durability to my shield, but I don't remember. And it's like, no, just give me a new shield. It's just like fewer very concrete cool upgrades feels great, which is why Bastion was like one of the best games ever made, because it's just like, hey, you just get new weapon, and each weapon is a completely category. It's not like, oh, this is the sharper sword. It's like, no, this one is a completely different category of weapon than any other one you've seen before, and opens up entirely new ways of playing the game, as opposed to like making the previous one irrelevant, therefore not giving you more content, just different looking version of the same content.
Spreads out the work over the items instead of just big stair steps. You're just kind of going up a ramp piece by piece.
Like I could go the rest of my life without picking up playing a game again where guns have stats.
Yeah, because the thing that's the failing of I think that the failing of maxing out that sort of let's make everything level up is that the thing is, I don't want to dismiss people who enjoy that, because obviously there are a lot of people who enjoy that feeling of, okay, I got 3% more critical chance with this weapon, I'm gonna swap it out. But the problem with that is that it sacrifices everything else for that feeling. Like the big games become exclusively about the slow grind, because I think it's such a failing of creativity too. Like 3% more something is the most boring upgrade you can have in the world, and in many cases the games will be entirely that. Like like for me, like I open up Cyberpunk and there's like 15 skill trees, and each skill tree has like 20 nodes in a weird web of unreadable mess. And I like search that for like, which of these give me a mechanic, which of these do something new, because a lot of them are like 3% shotgun damage, and it's like, wow, I'll really feel that while I'm playing through this game. That's gonna revolutionize the experience in a very real way, isn't it?
Especially when you encounter enemies that are 3% stronger against shotgun attacks. And so you never really feel anything until you go back to the beginning.
It's just kind of noise.
The problem is, like, I've had this conversation on some of my Let's Plays and conversation with myself, obviously, that the aspect of increasing your power needs to come, It needs to be part of a tactical decision or a strategy decision. You can't like, it's fun to have your character feel stronger, but it's what's more like, I think people misunderstand, and developers do that as well, but certainly players do that, and that's why some games are successful when they probably shouldn't be, is that whenever you get a weapon that is like 50% more damage, that can't be, or the feeling that you get from, oh, this is good, isn't that you're gonna have a faster gameplay experience. That it isn't that you're going to be, oh, I'm going to beat the game so fast, I'm just going to get done with this. That's not that's not what you're really feeling. What you're feeling when you get a better weapon is that you are given a better strategical option or a new option. And so that's why getting a weapon that does ice damage and a weapon that does fire damage is good.
Your sword swings now deflect projectiles.
That's more strategy that you are able to put into your game. It doesn't need to be specifically applied to combat. It can be applied to anything. But the fact that so many players
from thinking about communism.
Yeah, that's exactly
to talk about an actually real mechanic in Disco Elysium.
Exactly. The thing is, like, people miss that, the developers as well, but certainly the players don't understand that what is rewarding to them is the tactical freedom that they're given by their character getting better, rather than just numbers. And then developers just either don't understand that or actively don't care, and they just make the game the easiest game they can make, because making interesting games is difficult, so they just make it, look at that, 3% more ice damage.
Well, yeah, I often see it as it being like a mandated feature, so then they just fill it out because they need to, as opposed to because they feel particularly inspired that they want this mechanic in the game.
Yeah.
And that's what Supergiant is often really good about. It's like, no, this does new mechanic. And like one of the most fascinating things about their approach to Hades being a roguelike and all that is that like you pick up so many upgrades that are they just change how your character works instead of giving you just raw stats. And that's like just fundamentally a more interesting way to play a game by and large.
Yeah.
And I think I remember, and specifically I was trying to remember because it's been like 4 years now since I played them, but I think I remember the Deus Ex reboot games being better about this, is that they themselves are a cyberpunk RPG style game, but your skill tree, quotes, was an augment screen, and you were getting new augments on your body, and so they almost exclusively gave you new abilities completely from scratch, or opened up new entire ways to play the game, instead of giving you like 10% breach capacity.
I'm playing Human Revolution right now, and that's more or less how it works.
And that's how they should be.
It isn't exclusively like that, but yeah, that's absolutely.
But Cyberpunk's weird because it does have that. It has an entire section where you get to choose cybernetic mods you add to your body, which can change how you play the game. Like, I have a double jump option because I added extendo legs, so I'm like Inspector Gadget, and but then there's also an upgrade to reduce fall damage. It's like, what? What? Like, wouldn't the legs that are bouncy springs also reduce the fall damage? Like, why wouldn't you just put that there? Like, the payoff is you get reduced fall damage, or you get the jump bonus and reduce fall damage, but the downside is, like, I don't know, maybe you're heavier, or like maybe, like, it's so weird that they have Deus Ex does this really well. Like, every upgrade you get is modifying yourself to be less and less human. Whereas in Cyberpunk, it's like, yeah, you could be just a full-on synth, but also you get these upgrades on the back end. So like, I have, great ability. I have all these crazy things I can do, like 15 RAM deck slots. But then I also have to go and upgrade my RAM deck to make it like useful, because giving myself RAM deck slots doesn't mean anything. And I don't know. The old Deus Ex, I really appreciated the skill, the level, the skill tree in that one.
Feeling impactful and interesting and all that.
Yeah. There's actually like, and making a decision on it mattered to the story too, because the whole point was like you were augmented against your will, and so the idea is like, well, how much more are you willing to augment yourself just to like find the to reach the end of your quest? Which is like, the whole point is you're trying to.
Well, that's a thematic choice, but it isn't really. It doesn't show in the gameplay. Like, you don't get any penalty for augmenting yourself.
No, but I mean, like, the point is the narrative, and so like being immersed in the idea is like, okay, well, me taking on more. Oh my god!
If Cyberpunk punished you for augmenting. Or like that percent chance of
maybe they would make an interesting game if they did.
In the narrative, there's a percent chance of rejection. Like, what if you got permanent negative effects at a random when you continue to augment yourself, and you couldn't get rid of them, and you couldn't.
There are multiple Ripper docs, And so, like, what if you went to a Ripper doc that wasn't as good and they messed up the surgery? Like, you have your trusted Ripper doc, but there's other Ripper docs. Like, there's some shady guy in the middle of nowhere that you can just go and talk to him. He's like, oh, give her some mods.
This is why this genre could be so fun, is because you can have fun thinking about these insane ideas and how you'd implement them.
That's
there's a lot of weird stuff, but Cyberpunk. Well, I mean, again, Cyberpunk is Cyberpunk, but there's a lot of opportunity, and I think there's a lot of games that have taken advantage of this, but no one's put it together into one nice pie.
Yeah.
No, they have. It's just they haven't made it into a game.
Well, sure, it's called D&D.
I was thinking of Shadowrun, because Shadowrun does that. Like, all we were talking about, it's all Shadowrun. It's the mixture of the penalties that you get for chroming yourself out. It's the interaction between other people that have or don't have augments and all that sort of stuff. And then on top of that, it has all the magical and spiritual aspects of it. And it's narratively designed to make you think about the economical impact of post-humanism and the sociological impact of all the different races. And it's like, Shadowrun is an amazing setting, honestly. And it has all of these. Even the games do that a little bit.
I have to interrupt briefly because I'm fascinated by what I'm seeing right now, because I still have the Cyberpunk video streaming. It's just kind of been going on in the background silently. And I've reached a point where Gold's nonviolent approach has manifested in him trying to bait the shotgun blasts of the enemy team into shooting the wall that's pointing towards his objective, because they'll blow through the wall so he can crouch jump through it to finish the quest. And it's like, seeing how this a really specific approach to gameplay could lead to like a completely different experience is kind of fascinating, where I'm like, I didn't even know environment damage existed in this game yet.
Yeah. I found that out by accident, because in one of the missions, your friend, like Jackie, he kept disappearing, and I was like, where did he go? And I turned around, he was like in this other room. I was like, Jackie, that room's locked. How did you get in there? Like, there's no way to get in that room. And I just watched him, and I like started backing up further and further, and he eventually like hopped over a table through a window, and I was like, you can just go through windows? And so I just went over and started punching windows and jumping through them. I was like, oh, you can just jump through window. Okay, that's a good to know. Thanks. Like, but it was so weird to like watch. Yeah, to like, I didn't think there was a bunch of glass everywhere. I didn't think to just punch it and go through it. Like, I don't know. My brain was just like, oh, it's on rails. You don't break the environment.
Yeah. Trying to find those windows, literal windows to the narrative. It's a tremendous exploration.
And you can tell which windows aren't breakable because they have hexagons on them.
When Shotgun God shoots a wall, he opens his window, figuratively and literally. I'm curious though, Gold, have you ever played tabletop RPG?
I've done a little bit, but like I played Dungeons and Dragons with a friend maybe once or twice, but they were just kind of trying to introduce me to it. It wasn't an ongoing thing. And I played with my cousin too, but it seems like something that you want to consistently do and continue your character sheet and kind of advance the story that way. And it honestly seems like very similar to cinematic storytelling, like films, and how a director might block out a scene and say, we know this about the characters. Where are they going to stand? What's important? How is this going to play out? So it seems really fun from that perspective, but then it makes me more interested in the storytelling part and the visual part, and it makes me think more about writing and telling stories with video. Then it seems like a lot of bookkeeping, which is kind of discouraging.
It can be. It's interesting in that it is, because it's like an entirely imaginary game that exists in your head. It can literally be a different game from table to table. Like, different groups of people fundamentally have a different gameplay experience. Like we talked about the murder hobo min-maxer people that are just number crunching and want to be the best at the game, which for me is like a misinterpretation of what the game was to begin with. But then you have like people where it's like, it's practically like a strange like improv comedy troupe that is like, that just sort of
parallels there too, for sure.
Yeah, like you have your group of people that they've decided that this character has this kind of personality, and here's the scenario that they're in, and then you kind of just end up creating stuff from scratch, and that stuff can be really fascinating. And like there's the aspect where it's just, here's a problem, and you get, because it's not a video game, you get to pose a completely unexpected solution to the problem and then see if you can get away with it. But then there's also like just your 5 people are just in a place and there's not much going on, and then they just kind of create situations by interacting because they either don't get along or get along too well, or they have like particular proclivities that can conflict with each other, and just strange, bizarre nonsense.
It sounds a lot like improv in a lot of ways. It also seems like it really anchors around the DM and their goals of their storytelling. Like it seems like if you have somebody who's really good at telling the story and painting out the opportunity for a good story to be told, then that would be a completely different experience with somebody who's just trying to play it by the books and is just following.
You also have to play with the DM. Like I've had
well, because there's like different categories of players and DMs, and you have to hope they're the same category.
Yeah, but there's also a reciprocity as well. Like some DMs will, like for example, Effie is capable of pulling some great like reactive storytelling to things that I do, to weird things that I do. But at the same time, he's rigid in other aspects. And understanding that in comparison to, for example, I've had a couple of one-off sessions with another DM, and she's just capable of building this whole narrative out of nowhere that sticks with us just for a single session. But at the same time, is capable of building upon whatever we come up with. And Effie was much more of here's a challenge, whereas other DMs can be a little bit more yes and, you know what I mean? A little bit more closer to the
open-ended.
Yeah, I think Effie was new. I don't know if he was new-ish to DMing or not, but he was during our campaign. He was we were using a manual, so we were using a dungeon module where it's like, here is the story, and that's interesting because it's kind of it can lead to that specific situation where it's like, this is the main story, and it will snap to that main story, and you just have to like adhere to that. But then you can have divergences that keep stretching away, but then it kind of rubber bands back all the time. But even that depends on like the dungeon master themselves, I suppose. It's why I'm really intimidated by it and terrified of ever trying it. Being a dungeon master is because like you have to be like, some of the best dungeon masters are just so reactive that they can just roll with whatever the hell was thrown at them, because the players are not the characters written in the book, be it the plans the dungeon master had or the literal book that they bought that they're reading as a module as a starting point. But like, you can completely just invent new things from scratch, and that's where it's interesting, because that's like the final form of these ideas, both the GoldVision and Andrew perspectives of just having like this violent narcissist that thinks everyone exists for them, and this person that refuses to cause harm to anyone. Like video games are almost always built around a really specific play style being the way that you can play the game, and it's about executing that play style as well as possible in many cases, and there's usually not even the implication of there being other options. And then but D&D is like, it can just be anything. Like, it doesn't have to be about saving the world, it doesn't have to be about anything in particular. And so you can have both of those characters in the same party and see how they interact and how they survive, or if they even can survive in the same room for 10 minutes, and just have that play out in a way that you could never really do unless you specifically became a game developer and made a game about that specific scenario.
At the same time, I think it's also a very personal experience. There's I didn't have this perception before we played together, Keith and Effie and the others. But it's also like there's a lot of story that is only mine alone for my character, and I imagine it's the same for every other character. The more you let yourself engage with a game, with a tabletop game, the more you sort of create your own character in your head, and not necessarily just in the actions that you take, but like
Your
there's a
internal
lot
justifications that no one knows.
Yeah, and you can. I certainly got a tremendous.
I'm
kick out of it.
aware. I'm aware
Yeah.
of honey cakes.
No, even deeper than the honey cakes.
Your character's internal justifications caused my character an existential crisis.
Yeah. And you'll never know the rest.
I missed that campaign. That was nonsense.
I don't think it was nonsense. It was just eclectic.
It was great. No, but it was insane. It was completely insane. Baby, you got me all wet.
Yes. That was that. Yes.
D&D
I
is
think
so
I
much.
missed a lot of that.
D&D is so much work.
Yeah. There's other systems that are a lot better. What Gold is saying that, especially in regards to like D&D is made for you to level up. Fate, I think Fate system. I don't actually know what the full name is. It's just called Fate. There's also Fate. There's a smaller version of Fate. It's like, I don't know what the names. I'm sorry, but there's a specific system called Fate that's a lot better for you just to have no level ups. For example, making a whole campaign without leveling up. You just make the character from the beginning, and that's who you are. That's the ability, the tools that you have at your disposal, and then everything else is built based on storytelling, or it's good for one-offs. For example, Shadowrun is a little bit like that as well because there's fewer levels, at least in the 6th edition. So it's not as like, because in Dungeons and Dragons you have like literally the difference between level 1 and level 20 is it's tremendous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But in Shadowrun it isn't quite the same. And there's systems that are better for fighting that ever-present knowledge that you can be so much more powerful if you invest in the campaign. You know what I mean? And at the same time, it allows you to take the bite away when you lose a character, when you die, or when something happens to your character, like going to prison or something. There are systems that allow you to be okay with that end for that story. You know what I mean?
The narrative just keeps going, and people jump back in with a different character.
Yeah. Because my character,
It's a little bit of an American Horror Story ensemble cast sort of experience where if you want to keep your friends around but they died, then they just make a brand new character from scratch, maybe with a different personality entirely, and then the dungeon master kind of comes up with how you encounter that character in the wild or why they're introduced to the party. You try again.
Makes sense.
It's more of it's more about the collaborative storytelling experience than anything else, really, actually. And that's a lot of the fun, is just figuring that out.
That seems like it's the priority.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to take it in a more postmodernistic perspective, for lack of a better term, in just try to make it less goal oriented and just make it about either deconstructing the experience of living in a made up world or something. But I think it's in a lot of aspects, it's still, tabletop is always going to be restricted to the making sure you are having fun and your companions are having fun.
Oh yeah, like I've heard of campaigns where people just reject the idea of going on an adventure and they all run a farm together. And then the dungeon master just like, all right, let's build this one out. One of the benefits of
bad rain season.
Yeah, like it's like, let's think about the strife and difficulties that a farm would have, and like the neighbors, how the neighbors would be, and like what seasons are like. And like you can run with that. One of the benefits of D&D's pace is that like you have the session that can be anywhere from like 2 to 6 hours depending on the group style and whatnot. But then the dungeon master, the poor dungeon master, then has like a week or two to like think about what the hell just happened and actually think about like where this could go and like how to mechanically implement that. And that can, depending on the experience of the player, that can like make or break the thing. Like we had a campaign where we delivered a dragon egg, and then we immediately decided that we were going to pull a heist to steal the dragon egg after having gotten the reward. And the dungeon master was like, all right, I think we're going to take a break for today, and I'll see you guys next week when I figure out how to do any of that, which can be really funny. But I'm scrolling through GoldVision's YouTube channel. I'm getting that the age paradox, where you simultaneously feel like stuff is way too long ago and way too recent, if you know what I mean. You have the
25 games of Christmas.
Because like I watched Save Points Know the Challenge before this, and I was like, what? It's only 4 years ago. He was firing guns. He was shooting rockets, naming them after hypothetical firstborn children. That
was a trip.
A rocket that you fired named after your soon-to-be-born child that was a backwards F. Yeah, and that's somehow newer than the 25 Days of Christmas, which like I specifically remember what year that was, because it was like that was airing during the same Christmas where like I visited my brother at his new house, and he was trying my copy of Bloodborne, and he couldn't get past the first slightly larger than normal enemy. And like that have such a specific timeline for some of these video releases.
Sure.
It's just, but at the same time, I look at them and their dates are like, yeah, this was an eternity ago. You're going to be dead by tomorrow. Like we're all aging and ancient already. Because like the Christmas was 5 years ago. Planet Space Coffee was 5 years ago, which I can't accept as a reality. I can't process time.
To be fair, we literally made a whole podcast about the last 4 years. So there's 40 years and then there's 40 years, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's like the
car lease.
Yeah. There's like the weird experience of, I suppose, acknowledging that like the Trump presidency was 4 years and me being a full-time YouTuber has been 4 years. And like that means that those timelines line up almost. And I can't reconcile that in my head because that doesn't feel true ever.
A lot of change for that time.
Well, yeah, I think that's the other thing too, is every time you blink, we've moved somehow 5 steps ahead. and I mean, it's just because we keep, like we're in a nice age where we are both interconnected, but also haven't reached our top yet. And so we keep going forward and forward faster and faster because we have all the time and all the resources. It's going to be real fun when we get like 10, 15 years later and we're like, we bottomed out. Like we've run out of resources. We've run out of leniency for bad mistakes. And now we've got to like slowly try to survive as long as possible. But
I'm not sure that we're not there already, to be fair.
Probably. Nah, I don't think so. But
it's just that there's some people that are there and others that are not yet, and maybe we're not, and we're talking about this.
I'm more interested in the aspect of like of media in that way. Like I'm wondering how long until we bottom out on this idea that media has to be so big every time. So like every game has to be multi-million-dollar budgets. Every game has to have X amount of features. Every game has to.
That's the Marvel problem.
Yeah,
like,
and like
this series will dominate all of cinema, but it'll be the most expensive thing ever, which means it also has to like kind of be the same thing every time and kind of never rock the boat or do anything reckless or strange, because that just risks what they're accomplishing and what they're getting away with.
Just like Ubisoft then.
And like the AAA video games, like the most popular ones will often try almost nothing new in many cases and just kind of trying to keep whatever money they've made. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, consistency is good for investors because that is how you have a stable return. But
not a stable return, a stable growth.
Well,
because that's what investors want, not just return.
Well, sure, but gaming is hard. I mean, gaming is usually always growing unless you've failed in some way. Like you're always getting more consumers every time.
Not for small companies though. That's the thing. AAA is in that mode, and I think that's why it's stagnant as well. But for indie companies, it's not like that.
Well, I mean, you could say the same for most movies. Like, why does every movie company just kind of release the same thing with a different coat of paint? Is because
I'm saying the same thing for movies as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, every decade has its own movie trend. Like it's here's the rom-coms, and here's the disaster movies, and then here's the superhero movies. Because the problem, the trap everyone falls into is that like one of the best surefire ways to make a ton of money, or at least if you look at results, like one of the biggest breakthroughs are always like what feels like a fresh idea. It's not always necessarily the first iteration of that idea, but like the biggest games of all time, for example, are often like things that were completely different from the surrounding video games. Like you have like your Among Us, or you have PUBG, or you have Minecraft, and so on, where it's like they set trends, or Dark Souls, and so on. But if you're a massive company that has to always be making games, and you're mandated to be immediately on schedule for the next thing, you don't really like necessarily get to invent anything, so you just chase the existing things. So like Ubisoft's like, wow, we got a new IP, and what's it going to be? It's going to be Breath of the Wild. Because like that's
Ubisoft? Breath of the Wild?
Yeah, Ubisoft's
like
only
the
new
gameplay,
IP
right.
is that Phoenix Rising, I think, and it's like it's Breath of the Wild. It's much like Genshin Impact. It's like there's another Breath of the Wild game.
Did we see Phoenix Rising in the trailers and I forgot about it already?
I saw Game Grumps play it, I think, and then I looked, and then I kept hearing reference to the fact that it's like another Breath of the Wild like game, like Genshin Impact, but it's also potentially one that misses why I liked those things in the first place, which is also a big part of like trend chasers in that way. Like what really bothered me is that like going to Ubisoft again, they chased another trend, which is to have like you can play as any character and there's permanent death and stuff, but it's like kind of meaningless because they have the new Watch Dogs game, and it mostly just makes the game really incoherent and confusing. And like every time you do a story mission and then you die and then you have to replay that story mission, you just do the exact same dialogue but with a completely new human being, and everyone acts like you're not even a different person, and it's like you're just a well-known shapeshifter and nobody talks about it anymore. As opposed to like State of Decay was a game where you start with one protagonist character and then you recruit a series of different people and you're all trying to survive the zombie apocalypse together, and mercilessly and abruptly you can just die, and then you have to like go take control of one of the characters that you have recruited so far. And so you essentially the people you've recruited are kind of like a series of they're kind of like how many lives you have in the game, but they can also fall victim to all sorts of other things because you actually have to maintain and protect a headquarters that all those people are in. And that's like, it's a very interesting implementation of the idea of permadeath, but also like the idea of like a population collectively trying to survive the apocalypse. And there's similar stuff in like This War of Mine is like you start off with like two people in a bombed out building in the middle of a war, and you scavenge and you craft and you have your own moral line of like what you're willing to do in order to survive, and like whether or not you're going to be like going to these bombed out, low yield, risky places that are dangerous to you, but nobody has to get hurt in the process, and you're safe to just kind of scavenge what little can be found there, but every time you check back there'll be less. Or do you literally like go looting and attacking people's currently lived in homes and so on and so forth? And like and it's like it's a slow paced enough game that there's like maybe 2 chances in the entire playthrough to recruit entirely new characters to build up your roster from like 2 to like 4, and you can even in the expansion end up with like a child in your custody, but then like just like that, like one of those characters can just die and the game just keeps going, and they don't respawn and you don't retry the mission. It's just that character's gone, and now you have to figure out what that means for the survivors, and both like how when they deal with the fallout of losing that person, and also deal with like mechanically how am I going to keep this all together when there used to be a whole extra person doing it. It's kind of like goes back to the idea of like how well like mechanics mean things narratively beyond just how they affect your chances to win, and these assumptions of like whether or not violence is the default and whether or not death is the default, and so on, can completely recontextualize how you build your entire experience, and you can follow these ideas to their conclusion and get entire new genres out of it and really cool experiences. And it's why it's always frustrating to watch AAA just kind of chase its tail forever. And whenever they do use an idea, like when Watch Dogs had the play any person and they can die and so on, it's like it in no way approached what was interesting about State of Decay or This War of Mine, and instead just kind of wore that skin as like a mechanic and didn't explore what it means or what it could do. I don't know. It's why we all pretty much just exclusively play indie games, I guess.
Yeah. It's definitely a very difficult thing to even approach from a narrative standpoint. How do you make the player... Because the thing is, if you're going to make it a part of gameplay, it can be an unintended consequence, for sure. But... And you can, like Pyre, for example, where the loss of characters, either through death or through choices or wins or losses, that results in narrative consequences. But how should I put this? Imagine, like, whenever we're making a game, whenever we're playing a game, rather, and certainly in role-playing games, we are on the hero's journey. We're telling the story of somebody who went to the underworld and saved the world or got the MacGuffin, and it's a story of victory, and maybe there's sacrifice in the middle and that, but it's all for a goal. But there's also the other side of just typical traditional human storytelling of the story of a tragedy. And we not only don't we get many tragedies in video games, at least not for the protagonist, but also how do you make that how do you make the player want to tell a tragedy? You know what I mean?
Well, we found
or to comply with it.
Yeah. Not even to comply, just to get
from the
pleasure out of
financial struggle of Pathologic 2 that you kind of can't. It's not.
I think
it's not financially rewarded.
Oh yeah, no. But do you think Pathologic is a tragedy?
Oh yeah,
it is in
most ways.
But I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm not saying that in such a classical
bad
way. I mean, yeah, no. I mean more in the sense that Breaking Bad is a tragedy. You know what I mean? But how do you make the player want to create a set of, want even to play Walter White and make it so that the tragedy happens? How are you going to?
Well, we found from The Last of Us that
people don't.
The audience does not react well to the idea.
Yeah.
That the flawed protagonist should be any way punished for any of their actions at any point.
Let alone making the choice to have them punished.
Yeah, forcing the player to make the choice.
Although I guess maybe film media is not even that different, because on some level they might finish stuff out of obligation because they like the characters and it's passive, so you can just kind of just sit there and just watch the whole thing, whereas a game you have to push through and constantly choose to proceed forward. But I
think there's a big difference there.
But even in Breaking Bad, I don't think people necessarily got it, in mass. A lot of people didn't really get the right idea of who they were supposed to be rooting for, or who was the person that should have been punished, and so on. Because there's a whole lot of Walter White did nothing wrong, and Skylar White is a horrible person, rhetoric that goes around that is this is, you're definitely not engaging with this the way that the author was hoping, because it's pretty, they don't pull punches.
And The Last of Us 1 and 2 both have the same problem as well.
Yeah, where the Joel is judged continuously by those games, but then the audience seems to never consistently agree with that idea. And
Ellie as well.
And what?
And Ellie in the second game.
Yeah. No, that's an entire franchise that's essentially about the protagonists making poor choices and being kind of awful human beings, and then the audience being but they're the video game protagonists, that means they're good. And to be fair, video game players have been conditioned for decades to just not think about being mass murderers.
Well,
yeah, that's definitely Mass Effect's. That's what I was
desensitization. Happened.
Yeah.
The thing is,
people do not like it. People do not like it when I kill characters, and then I'm like, well, he was what? He's probably like 35. So he probably like grew up with a family and like had some ambitions at life, and then those ambitions didn't pan out, and then he fell into this particular path, and like there's like a whole history there. Like I think about that at random intervals during both shows and games and so on. I'm just like, all right, that was a person. I'm a person. I just killed a person. Does the narrative of the particular thing I'm playing support that, or like does it scan? Like Joel, I understand why he does those things, because Joel is just kind of a terrible human being, and he's been a terrible human being for like decades, and that's like the narrative of that thing, and you see why he does that, and you can empathize with why he does that, but that doesn't mean that the things he does are good suddenly. But there's a lot of video games where it's like, ha ha ha, I'm happy-go-lucky Nathan Drake, and I crack jokes and I wink at girls, and I just murdered 75 brown people to get an achievement. And it's like, I can't. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can support this dissonance here. And feel like, wow, what a charming fella he is. It's like, I got the achievement for 100 AK-47 kills on the way to this ruin that I'm robbing because I feel entitled to rob it. It's like,
But I think that's why tragedies, in a way, tell more than the hero's journey can ever tell. Because when you tell a story of Nathan Drake from the perspective of a hero, you still allow the player to be critical of Nathan Drake. I've never played any Uncharted game, so I'm just riffing off of what you're saying. But it's like you still allow the player to be like, okay, I'm literally playing a flawed hero here, and maybe that's portrayed to some extent, but maybe not to all extent, maybe not to every occasion. Maybe some framing here and there is bad, or bad in just from a outside of the game perspective rather than necessarily in the game. But when you're telling the story of when you're writing Breaking Bad, when you're writing the fall of a character, you're necessarily imprinting the criticism into the storytelling. There's no way to engage unless you're just ignoring parts of the narrative. There's no way to engage with it without understanding that the writer is saying this is bad. You know what I mean? It's like Count of Monte Cristo. That's that book for me. I haven't read it in a long time, but I remember it being also very much about that. Like I cannot avoid. I just can't avoid understanding what the author. I don't remember who the author was, but I can avoid understanding what the author wants to tell with the story. Where in a traditional hero's journey, it's a lot easier for you just to have whatever interpretation you want to have.
Yeah,
I think that. I mean, that's the constant battle that all these games have, is to tell a meaningful narrative. I'm glad that they are trying more and more, because all our traditional games are more just hack and slash, just watching orbs move from one side of the screen to the other one, and then there's a woman or a president you're supposed to protect. But they're all figuring it out. It seems like telling a story in a video game is this just evolving art form, and it really is this opportunity to explore a lot of different emotions and a lot of different characters. And the player, I only recently felt like when I was watching something that a good metaphor was that I'm the quiet friend when I'm watching something. And you're there in the room with the people who respect you and expect nothing from you. You're just kind of a child who can witness this conflict scene to scene, and you're present, but you're not participating. And then the video game is this maturation where now you're just a young person, and you're capable of moving into the world and accepting the responsibility of these conflicts. And it's not just the words and the characters and what they say, but it's the actions that make up the majority of the narrative. And that freedom to explore a hero's journey or to just wander in the world is it's intertwined with the actual life of the actual person who's playing the game and the things that person wants to do. Because we have also hit a point that there's more game hours right now than there is time. There's more games out there. It wasn't always that way. You got Mario 64 and you're like, I'm going to play it again because I have this and my mom's not going to buy me every game for the Nintendo. So
my spreadsheet's sweep.
And it just keeps getting longer. And so now it's kind of a joy that we get to choose which stories we want to be part of instead of just being subject to the 3 games that came out this year that are worth playing, that are long enough that they'll take up our free time. And so it's this great opportunity to tell these stories, but we have to find the ones that are trying to advance the narrative and not trying to just spread out the art over as long a period of time as possible through drops and just the slow incremental growth from bronze to silver to gold armor.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's sort of the power of YouTube sometimes too, and content creators is just being able to signal boost certain things that are out there because it's hard. Because people might actually think like, you know what? I don't want to be a mass murderer open world boy today. I want to be a cyberpunk bartender. But they have to know that that's a game. Like somebody has to, like that has to reach them. And that's the hard thing, both because the more interesting stuff is often much more granular and low budget and niche and harder to distribute, but also there's just, once again, there's such a boom of games which enabled those niche games to exist that they're all lost in the noise constantly. It's a quite experience just trying to get to them at all.
And I don't think it, maybe years ago I would have felt more of an obligation for things to either be completely blown up and mainstream and number one and charting. But now it seems like it's more about just kind of spreading things, like you say, signal boosting, just kind of getting it out to a couple more people and amplifying the noise that you want to hear, if that makes sense, to kind of just make the signals of like even games that you love that are too long, highlighting the parts of the game that are good, because, next year a bunch of games come out and 3 years from now, a bunch of games are going to come out, and they're just starting the games that are going to come out 3 years from now. And so they're going to listen, the developers and the storytellers and the producers are going to listen to the voices that they see out there. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people who are on the major social media sites of YouTube and Twitch are younger skewing, and they're just very able to be influenced. And then their opinions often reflect the things that already exist rather than new things or potential things. And so then we end up seeing more of the same because investors are looking to increase the next version to match what the previous version was. And they saw that certain things worked in the battle royale format or whatever, and then the next version has to come out and kind of reflect that. And so I think that at the same time, that generation of people who is growing up on YouTube and Twitch, they're going to mature, and then they're going to start looking for those deviations, those new ideas. And I think that they just need to have the words to express. And I think that it's kind of up to content creators to express those words for them so they can understand and clarify the thoughts, and then get more of a singular thought that can be trumpeted loud enough that developers and the studios that produce games will hear and make it. Because they want to make big titles that get a lot of numbers. I don't know if you saw Cyberpunk tweeted out 1 million concurrent players on Steam. That's just the truth. They achieved that. And that was an aspiration. And maybe it takes 7 years of hype to achieve something like that during a time when not a lot of games are also coming out at the same time. But they have those revenues now, and they're going to continue making things and continue evolving our whole gaming ecosystem. And so they're going to listen to the things that people say. And then if we're amplifying the right stuff, or at least the stuff we like, we're going to see more of it. That's the theory, at least. I can't promise.
That's definitely why I started my. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna buttress it because that's definitely how I started. Why I started my YouTube channel, because RPGs are very difficult to do let's plays of, and yeah, I think. Sorry, Keith, I don't want to cut you off. You should have seen it coming.
let's.
You were gonna say something.
I was just thinking that like stuff. It's Did I lose my thread a little bit there? I was definitely shocked when we never got like a cynical AAA Undertale like cynically produced, like, oh wow, it's a turn-based retro style Earthbound where you don't have to kill people. That would have hurt my brain. But no,
that's interesting.
Arguably, Mother already exists.
Yeah, like there's always the hyper mainstream, just plays what's popular, and let's open loot boxes and like let's inflict gambling practices on young audience members and then try to get them to buy our merch, which itself has a time limit for when you can buy it, so that you have a FOMO reaction and have to get it immediately, and that surpasses your ability to question whether you actually want it or not. Like there's always this exploitative nature towards the next generation and so on, but there's also like there's some channels that do a really good job at just showcasing what's possible out there and letting people question what even is out there. Because there's always the frustrating people I get on like Disco Elysium or certain other playthroughs where people are like, is this even a real video game, or like this is just talking, or like these like there are people who are going to have this frustrating recoil against something that's different because they're not ready to question it, and they'll take like a few bouncing offs to finally engage with the idea. But like I was there, like I remember like I played Diablo 2 when I was like 12, and it was like the most addictive thing in the world. And then I bought a copy of Temple of Elemental Evil, which was my first CRPG purchase. And then I think I probably pirated a copy of Fallout 1 or something, because like Fallout 3 was so fun and wow, what a crazy new experience. And then in both cases, I was like, it looks like Diablo, but it doesn't play like Diablo. It's like, I can't even figure out how to move. Like, how do you play this? Like I couldn't even process the idea of a CRPG as a teenager. And like we have such a specific series of verbs that we build up while playing video games, and like there's like you can learn some of this from watching like playthroughs that are like gaming for non-gamers, or like let's watch this person that has never played video games try to play GoldenEye or whatever, and see like all of the assumptions that they make based on not knowing how to play the game, or like all the things that the game just assumes that they would know based on the idea that they already play games and that are never explained by the game and are unintuitive, and that they fundamentally wouldn't figure out. Or like watching somebody try to play Portal where they only realized how to move with WASD, but they never realized to look around with the mouse, and like those kinds of experiences. Like that's how we as like game babies like experience new genres, is like we misinterpret them, and we're often frustrated by that idea and then just move on. And so it's like the constant media exposure, or like having channels that can express these ideas in interesting ways, is like a lot of how this stuff can become acceptable to people. And like, so I've have my like, I don't even know, like 500, 700 episode Let's Try series where I'm just trying to like throw new games at people. And there's like Mandalore Gaming likes to get into like Eurojank and strangeness, and like Errant Signal will try to extract the art from the game and try to really interrogate what it means and what it's expressing beyond just it being a game where you just progress and win. And was it Super Bunny Hop does his work with like, there's usually an annual episode that's called Games for My Inbox, which is just like, hey, here's some games that were in my inbox that people emailed me about that I had never heard of before, so I'm just going to cover them by default because I don't know what they are. And like those opportunities lead to the chance for much more interesting games that don't have a foothold in the industry to suddenly be put forth before new people. And there's like this sort of like aspect of like, what's it called? Was it Velvet Underground? There's a band that has a famous phrase where people always say like, no one bought a copy of like Velvet Underground or whatever band it was, but everyone who did started a band. Like there's this aspect of indie development where even if the games aren't massively successful, if they reach the right people, there's the knock-on effect of them inspiring the next generation of game developers to then explore those ideas even further, instead of just making Assassin's Creed. And like awakening the right people to what games are capable of, which is virtually anything. Like just you can just put anything in one. suddenly changes the assumptions of what games are, and then suddenly we get wildly different, strange things. Like I'm just scrolling through my Let's Try list and seeing I see Niche, a game where you make animals and they crossbreed on a hex across the continent, and every time they move, they then keep morphing into a different hybrid version of the previous one with different traits that changes their survival chances. Or like Sludge Life was this most bizarre first-person graffiti vibing simulator. Like Cloudpunk, the one where you play as you're essentially like an Amazon delivery person in a cyberpunk world, and your dog
Cloudpunk.
is in your computer. Yeah, like your poor dog who is an AI, and you need an AI to run your ship, so you put your dog in there, and he has low RAM, so he gets tired a lot, and it's like a sad dog. It's like, oh, and it's like you have games interrogating capitalism and interrogating democracy and interrogating the ways that we fundamentally organize society, and like it's like, oh, you suddenly were like, oh, this is right, games are art, and here's what they can do with that.
Big. They're big, and I feel like we're still in like the black and white cinema era of video games. Of what
I think we're
kind of progress that we're going to be capable of.
Yeah, I think we're entering a new era on two fronts majorly because of, one, the popularity of streaming specifically, not just YouTube, but specifically streaming is going to shape development of video games in a way that I don't think we can foresee right now. Maybe we can have ideas and hypotheses, but this next decade is going to be. I think we are seeing now the beginning of Twitch as a mainstream platform in the way that YouTube started being a mainstream platform 10 years ago. And on the other hand, as well, because of the economical situation of the world and the fact that so many people are used to playing games on mobile, there's less and less of a need for games to just look good. And so we have the success of Among Us and not Fortnite specifically, but what's that other one? Fall Guys. Those two games in a short period of time just achieving enormous numbers, and they don't look particularly. I mean, they look good, but it's just not. It's
Minecraft too. Minecraft generation.
Yeah, for sure. But like, I think from now on, just people can't afford the new graphics cards. They can't have a 4K monitor. The monitor alone is the price of a console.
Especially
it's
with
like
Bitcoin
what?
existing.
Yeah, it's like I think we're the next few years we're gonna see things that we haven't seen before or we haven't seen very often. Looking back, I think there's certain games that definitely stick to my mind as being outliers. Like
Battle Chef Brigade, the competitive RPG cooking game.
Yeah, I played it. It was
Sounds
pretty
awesome.
fun.
I love the words you can just merge together in these cases.
Yeah. It is really a Battle Chef RPG, but puzzle game too. It's really interesting. I actually do recommend Battle Chef Brigade. It's fun.
Yeah, or like Return of the Aubergine, the non-linear time travel detective game.
Yeah,
fantastic game.
Video games are fascinating when they try. Pyre is it's a rugby visual novel.
I feel like the future is future's definitely going to be more service games. I think there's been a really
That's
good
the dark side, yeah.
Yeah, there's been there's been way too much success in games like Fortnite or Fall Guys
which means a lot of the most popular
GTA
games this
Online.
decade won't exist the next decade.
Yeah, I think the idea is that, like, why are you going to invest years, especially Cyberpunk is such a good example, why are you going to invest decades of development to make this game just to get dunked on? When you could have, like, GTA 5, or there's still children playing GTA 5.
They couldn't make fun. GTA 5. I'm pretty sure they couldn't.
But that's the thing, is like, GTA 5 already exists. Why make another one? Just add new stuff to GTA 5.
I think,
like, just keep doing it forever. Fall Guys is so like cartoonish. You could just keep making stuff for that for the next 100 years, and no one's gonna be like, "Oh, where's the new graphics?" Like, Fall Guys doesn't get better looking. It stays like Fortnite's the same way. It stays consistent in its art style. If you can find a nice niche art style and make a games as a service, you can probably just succeed forever, as long as you're continually making content that's enough to keep people coming back.
I don't know that they can. Remember
Fortnite's
MMOs?
still going. Fortnite's still, like, they literally don't even, like, you can watch a concert.
Yeah,
in Fortnite.
but like
that
World of Warcraft,
sense.
World of Warcraft was also is also still going right now.
Yeah,
like we had
EverQuest is still going.
Yeah, EverQuest is still there. Like RuneScape came back. It had to come back because people wanted it.
Yeah.
Like that's like the thing is like you if the idea of a place you go and spend all day, and that's like when I clock out of work, I clock into X game. That's what people want to do. They don't like most people don't want to like bounce from game to game to game to game because it's expensive and it's time consuming and it can be frustrating because you're gambling. Every time you buy a game, you're like, well, God, I hope this was worth $60, and you put it in. You're like, well, I wish I was better at gambling because it never is worth $60.
This is one of the many reasons I refuse to open loot boxes in Overwatch is because I want to know that I'm choosing to play it because I actually just want to play the game that day. And I have like 600 loot boxes and I've never opened a single one. The only skins I have unlocked are the ones you unlock automatically via events that you can't avoid, basically. But I've never used any of them. And
what's funny to me,
just play the game on a pure mechanical level, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I just want to keep playing this game. I'm not making. There's no experience meters that do anything.
I'm on the opposite side.
Like
I stopped playing the game even though I opened loot boxes. So now I know I don't want to play it.
And I'm the 100% opposite side where I open loot boxes, but I don't care. I have zero care what's inside of the loot boxes. I don't care about the skins. I don't care about the
stuff.
I
don't know what the loot box opening screen looks like.
It's flashy.
It's a box.
It's not.
You press
not
open
good.
box, and then 4 things appear, and that's it. And then you
they
press open
pop
box
out.
again.
It's like flashy, and there's a noise. I don't like it.
Yeah,
I look away.
I don't know. It's really, but like, yeah, I open boxes in Overwatch, but I don't buy them, and I don't go out of my way to like care what's in them. Like I click them to get the number off the screen, but like the contents of them don't change my enjoyment of the game. I already have the skins I want from every character. And so any new skins that come out are like, oh, I must have that. It's like, oh, that's a cool skin. And I just move on with my life and just keep playing the game, which is why I'm there, is to play the game.
I think you're having a little bit of narrow vision in regards to, like, yeah, the vast majority of time we might be playing comfort games in a way. And looking back at my own gameplay experience, that's definitely the case. Like I spend a lot. I spent many hours playing Counter-Strike, playing The Sims, playing games that I know well that are not necessarily very engaging in the sense of or Diablo 2, for example, in the sense of like it's something new. It's something that I know and I go back to play it because I like it. But that doesn't mean those are not necessarily the games that stand out for me. The games, some of my favorite games I've only played once and I never went back to them again. And I'm sure, and like I'm playing right now Knights of the Old Republic 2. I'm having a blast. I only played it twice. I finished it twice back like 15 years ago, and I'm having a blast right now. And I haven't gone back to it in 15 years. And
that's part of the experience of running a YouTube
one of my
channel
favorite
like
games.
this is like the opportunity to like actually dive back on like those iconic games that are just built up in your head and figuring out if you still like them and all that. Yeah, I have so many games that I played briefly as a child and never again, like Jet Force Gemini and Perfect Dark and Symphony of the Night and even Bastion. Not a kid, but Bastion I only played the day it came out. And like there's so many iterations of that idea, but like the fact that they're burned into my brain so much time later kind of just screams like how singular and interesting and different those games were and how kind of frustrating things can be. That's why like last episode I was like, this is a threat when the trailer came up for Perfect Dark having a sequel again, and I'm like, no, I don't trust you because this is modern AAA and they're going to take something that's singular and interesting and different in my head and make it probably incredibly normal and rote.
Yeah,
and that's like the opposite of what I want from iconic, strange, different things that I remember.
Yeah, like AAA just and like big incentive for profit ruins games effectively. And sometimes there's games that come out that are nice.
Like just imagine like Ubisoft like making the sequel to like or reboot or remake of Mischief Makers. The one about the robot.
I would rather not play that.
That goes shake shake.
Makers.
Shake shake. It's like imagine a modern AAA company trying to make a version of that they think is what it needs to be to sell in the modern world. It's just
Shake open loot boxes.
The very thought is a threat. It's like when Robot Chicken's parody episode was like, we're making Dark Crystal 2, and it's like it's gonna have rapping in it. It's like it hurts because it's what might actually happen. It's the fear.
The thing is, like, it's the objective of making profit and in selling it. Like, obviously, people want to earn money and be successful in what they do. But when that comes at the expense of the objective of making something good, that's the problem. Because the objective of making something good has to be there. It can't be ignored, and they ignore that a lot. They just, is it going to sell? Well, then it's good. They equate the profit
and
to
indie
how good it
It's
is.
a lot about hype management.
Yeah,
it's a lot about hype management and kind of building that product to be sold. And I feel like the audience is kind of culpable in the same way.
Definitely.
How long is it going to take for us to get burnt out on hype and then just kind of focus on the quality of the game?
I don't think it's ever going to happen.
I want to believe that as gamers, we can figure out a way to kind of rise above just getting needlessly excited about.
There's always going to be new kids being born.
I think that collectively, I think as a collective, we will never progress past that. But everyone has their own individual story of maturing and learning about themselves and what they want in a more interesting way than just chasing what everyone's talking about all the time.
It is impressive to see the hype for Cyberpunk when less than a decade ago, like less than 5 years ago, No Man's Sky came out.
No, one of these happens every year, if not more than once a year.
But that's the thing, is like that one, I remember it being such a huge, chaotic storm about disappointment and having too much expectation and literally
we made a
nothing given in
podcast
return.
about why it was going to be bad before it came out. And even in that podcast, like a week before its release, people were arguing with me because I dared say, I don't think it's even going to have multiplayer.
The thing is,
which it didn't.
It didn't.
But then, like, Cyberpunk comes out and people are like, I'm so shocked. Why is it not good? And it's like, well, what did you expect? This is
Andrew,
the formula is already written in stone. If
we saw that before.
Is bigger than if hype is bigger than the release date of the game, then the game will be bad. Like, there's no like if, ands, or buts about it. You can't make a good game with a lot of hype and release it and everybody loves it. That's just not how it ever works.
No, I'm sure I can come up with a game that has been good and hyped.
The more hype there is for a game, the less good the game will be. That's just how that math works out.
It probably was Witcher 3, actually.
Witcher 3 is a good example.
That might be one of the better received hype games ever, because there's such a backlash over and over again. Partly because people always have this idea, their own ideas of what it even was going to be, but also because they always promise too much, and then the games are always, at the end of the day, largely iterative. So at best, it's like the thing you played before, but a little different, and people but they're sold a new experience, which it was never going to be.
And I think, like, from a high chair philosophy perspective, because I'm just a dumb baby and I don't know shit, is I think there's something about, like, art isn't good when it's done for the betterment of profit rather than for, like, the will to create. I don't think there needs to be. I don't think, like, it's not like something as soulless as, like,
the sweet spots when people solve the impossibility of, like, when they manage to make something that they genuinely wanted to make and then it sells.
Yeah, like I always think about, like, Cuphead,
like City Skylines or something.
Cuphead's a good example of someone trying to make something to survive. Like, they're not making this with the intention of, like, oh, it's going to be in a museum one day and people will like it 50 years from now. They're making it to survive. But there's enough creativity and passion behind it that the finalized product is worth the is better or is more or is bigger than the presumed financial success the people making it expected. Whereas I think AAA games are, like, inverse, where every game is made with the expectation they're going to make double the amount they invested back into it. And, like, that never goes well in any way, because either you get a product that is like is just very derivative and okay, well it's new and it's shiny, but is it good? Or you get complete and utter flops and people just go like, yeah, well, it don't make that again. It's like, well, no, you can make that, just don't make it that way.
Art is all healthier when it's made in in a lower consequence environment.
Well, that too.
Where you can get away with experimenting and making something strange and hoping it works out, but also it's not going to be the end of the world. And that's the tough thing. You basically, because it leads to an overwhelming number, especially like in early indie games and whatnot. There was an overwhelming amount of like, this is the perspective of a well-to-do, like financially secure white man, because that was the type of person that could take the gamble to make their dream project and make their special thing and not have to worry about it ending their life if it didn't work out.
And then Braid happened.
Yeah, that was the game I was thinking of.
I figured it was.
It was 100% Braid as Jonathan Blow.
Yeah.
I've never regretted following an indie developer on Twitter more than Jonathan Blow.
I see. It didn't follow Minecraft then.
Oh no, I guess I did watch Notch also at some point. Yeah, they're disappointing people. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But he was also.
I feel bad. I feel bad for people who use Twitter in that way. Like, I use Twitter to just follow artists, and I never get disappointed because they post art. I'm like, thanks, that's exactly what I wanted from you.
Game developers are artists.
Well, yeah, but they're
and
also.
It takes them. Yeah, I know. But it takes a long time for the next game to come out, but they recommend things. And Jonathan Blow recommends great games. I just wish he didn't also tweet.
Well, that's the thing. Is like, I follow accounts that specifically only just post the one thing and move on. So it's like, well, I don't have art, so I won't say anything. It's like, good. Keep doing that. Don't say anything. Just only post. But I don't know. It's weird. It's weird having that front window access to people's lives and thoughts. Granted, they're giving it to you public, like they're openly standing on a soapbox with a microphone shouting to the void.
That's
with
the
those
stuff
bad
they choose
opinions.
to say out loud.
But like it is weird that you could just knock on a door. You could just walk over to someone's Twitter and go like, "Hey, I liked your game. What are you not gonna be following this anymore? Okay, bye, goodbye." Like,
what have I done?
It's so weird that you can like you can go a complete 180 on a person within a matter of minutes, and that person is tied to art, and that art could give you feelings of positivity, and then you turn
I just
around
like the way they draw dogs, but now they're putting names in double parentheses, and I don't want to see where this goes.
Yeah,
that's something that's something that I've grown. I think I'm sorry. That's something that has made me grow as a person in the last few years. I think my engagement with art has been very much shaped as well by understanding the people and relating to the people that make art, especially in the video game arena, with newer games specifically. It's not that I can't detach the games from the people who make it. Is that I think it makes it better when you know. It's like that parasocial relationship of feeling like you're not. It's not like feeling like you're friends with the developers, but at the same time, it sort of is. It's like when you're playing your friend's game, but you're not their friends, but you know them a little bit, and you can relate to it.
Saying.
Yeah,
it's like reading a book and then knowing the author and seeing their picture and then thinking about them as they're writing the story to you.
Oh yeah, like it's way
I think
weirder.
The same thing, except you see a team of people who are going to go on to make other games, and they're part of the conversation too. And you're not just reading what they're saying or seeing what they post, but you're interacting with it, and the things that you like of what they've done, or even any messages you send them is going to influence them slightly in whatever direction they're going to go in the next game that they work on, or the next thing they draw.
It's happened to me. For example, Sunless Seas. What's the team behind Sunless Seas? I don't remember the name of the studio. They made Sunless Skies as well. And I played Sunless Seas before I followed them on Twitter, and I played Sunless Skies after I followed them on Twitter. And my experience of the game, I feel that retroactively, Sunless Seas is basically Sunless Skies. It's the same.
You've got that
sort
investment aspect.
No, but also the understanding
Yeah.
from what they're trying to say, you know, it just enriches.
I just think about like it's way weirder. It's very different for me to like read a Harlan Ellison book or a Margaret Atwood book versus like a Lindsay Ellis book or a John or Hank Green book, where it's like, oh, these are the people that have been a part of my online viewing experience for like a decade each, and so it's fundamentally different to read a book that's like by them. And to some extent, I think that's that's where some of the toxicity comes from with fandoms, especially for things that aren't even out yet. Is that if you get there's Reddits for these things, like there would be like a Cyberpunk Reddit for years before the game even comes out, and it's just a little fan community obsessing over this thing, and every single new detail and tweet and thing or interview or facial expression made during a vlog and so on is like interrogated for every aspect it can, and people feel more and more invested and like they're promised something, and they feel more and more like they are owed something, and they also feel closer to the company, which makes them lash out in defense of them whenever anything comes, even though the company will never love them back and doesn't know they exist and all that. Because the tools are there, if you just click the right button, you can be like getting served up investment media about this particular thing for years and years, and like entire YouTube channels go from not making a living, like not existing, to making a channel, to literally making a living off of making content on that channel when they're still just talking about a game that's not out yet. And that'll be like a dedicated fan channel because they're just feeding off of that wave and like the intensity and the power of all that. But like that is that's too much. It's too much, and it's a lot of it's for the wrong reasons. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It probably comes off very very negative, but like I don't care. I don't care what will come of a game. I care about what is when the game is there. If I could read a million articles about how cool X game's going to be and what the promise is and what the expectations and but at the end of the day, like until it's in my hands or until it's out in the wild and someone can like show me what it looks like, there's no guarantee. And gaming, much like any creative thing, is something that changes so wildly over time. Like you can like animation is such a good example of this, where you can see you watch Disney movies and you'll see how much has changed in just like 5 minutes. Someone could go, wow, this is the story I built, and someone comes and goes, yeah, but that doesn't make sense, and then the whole rest of the story has changed because of that. And that's okay, that's normal, that's how things do. But that doesn't translate well to like people who've built up or who are now living in these fake cardboard castles they built out of this hype or expectations or beliefs, and then you come in and you have to like douse it with water so it crumples over them, and they actually endure the reality of like, this fake world you built for yourself isn't real. Like this game you think is coming isn't ever gonna be here and never existed. This is just like a commercial bubble that you found yourself
takes
in.
Time to get there though. Like you are immune to hype, and I think I'm immune to hype.
That's what I was saying before about how like collectively we won't probably ever be past it, but everyone has like their individual story.
Yeah, there's always going to be new kids.
But I'm not immune to hype. I just get hype in the moment. Like I don't have.
Well, that's not hype. That's liking things.
Yeah. No, that's hype.
I think that's like an emotional wave.
Yeah, but like
hype is like anticipation.
Yeah,
but that's the thing, is like I can get excited for what's coming. Like I know something's coming. I get excited. I get hyped for it. But it's usually something that's like tangible. Like, oh, there's going to be I'm watching a show, there's going to be a big fight in like 5 minutes, and I know that's coming. I can get really hyped for that fight, imagining what that fight's going to be like and getting excited. I see what you mean. And then the fight comes, and even if it's not to my expectations, it's not a disappointment to the level of like waiting 10 years for something.
Or no fight.
Or no fight at all. Yeah, like and I've done that. I've gotten really hyped about something, and then the twist was like, no, we're not going to fight. And it's like, how do you take this energy and turn it into surprise? Because I'm just bitter. Like I wanted to fight. But that's okay. Like I don't think it's bad because of that. That's just like that's me having an expectation and then being thwarted by it, and that's good. You did it. You
game
got me
hype is different.
I
Yeah,
feel
but
like
that's the
I
thing.
should.
Game hype's commercial hype. It's trying to
Yeah,
make
I think
you.
we're talking about commercial hype in this.
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so,
but
like,
also like it's really weird for me,
Commercial
specifically in
hype
regards
is
to
like
the hype for
exclusively not good to let foster in yourself.
but also like it's not pervasive is not the word. It's perverse in the sense that what the studios do is they put out feelers. They put the teasers out and they see what people react to. Like they literally for years and years we only had a single CGI video of Cyberpunk 2077, but CDPR, they knew exactly what people were hyped for. They knew exactly what to make their game for, and like if they liked the aesthetic or if they liked that the girl didn't have pants or the blood or whatever, and they knew exactly where they were going with it, but they didn't before they put the teaser out. You know what I mean? So the hype is constructed as much by the players or by the people who get hyped, as much by them as it is by the company. It's like the No Man's Sky situation is the same. Like they didn't say things. They didn't say yes to everything. They said yes to the Last Jedi.
Just this aspect. Oh, because you don't watch Star Wars. I forgot.
No,
Like there was that was a case of a huge amount of backlash because the players watched the previous movie, then spent 2 years. I said the players again. I always say game terms. I can't stop it. It's my world.
Yeah, I know.
People watched The Force Awakens and then had 2 years to just obsess. And if you weren't on online fan communities that obsess over the stuff over the time, then you were like immune to this entire aspect, and it was baffling to hear about afterwards. But if you're part of these groups that just fester and obsess and pick about every detail, and then they like project their own expectations on what the thing has to be in order to be good and so on, then they go into the movie and they feel betrayed for it not doing what it never was going to do. Because like, yeah, like there definitely is like an aspect of like fan communities and individuals being able to just create hype from just on their own essentially and their own expectations and get toxic when their expectations aren't met.
Yeah,
but the game companies also purposely do that in order
it makes
to
them money.
Yeah, but they also like feed certain hypes that they know they might benefit from or can deliver better.
Oh yeah, like when Sean Murray
think,
let people believe that their game still had multiplayer up until it was already out.
Yeah,
yeah.
And then they had to put the poor GameStop employees had to take little stickers out and put them over the part that said multiplayer on the printed PlayStation 4 discs because it even said it on the box, and that's how far that lie got.
Which is that is actually a situation where I'm very curious how that happened.
I've never been more confused.
How do you make a box art that says that when in theory you can't even make the box art until it's been like approved, right? Like you don't know what the rating and stuff is going to be, so you have to like wait until someone like tests the game, and by that time you should know that the game doesn't have multiplayer. It's not like the game went gold before multiplayer was before they realized they couldn't add multiplayer. Like they knew going in, so like they told the box developer, like the box maker, to like it's gonna have multiplayer.
That was a confusing situation. I feel like I should wrap this
up. It probably
up.
worked, but then it didn't.
Maybe.
No, I don't think they even had code in the game for multiplayer.
I don't. So my assumption is that there's always a disconnect between marketing and developers. Yeah. But in Hello Games it's different because it's a smaller company. So like the marketing team is just Sean.
Wasn't it done by Sony though? The marketing. No.
Hello Games had to do all of the PR and everything themselves. Sony just front loaded money. They were just like, here's some cash, make it work. But like Sony they're not going out of their way to do anything.
We're 2 hours in, so I feel like I should wrap this up. But there is a audience question that's exactly about the thing we're currently discussing. So maybe I should ask that real quick.
Throw it out.
Ryan Martiliano asks, which game is the most disappointing that you've played? Like so on the nose and perfect for this exact moment.
Mm-hmm. I should have thought, because I read that question before. I should have thought about it.
Perfect Dark Zero.
Oh. It's almost always a sequel, right? Unless you're part of like the hype cycle, which we are for these things like No Man's Sky.
I literally like begged to get a Xbox 360 because I wanted it so badly. Because I spent like a whole summer playing Perfect Dark, and I beat everything. I unlocked every item. I did all the challenge missions. I have the strategy guide for it. Perfect Dark is like my favorite game on the N64. Like, with Banjo-Kazooie tying in
Perfect
like my
Dark's
favorite top.
A phenomenal game, aside from how horribly its aiming has aged.
And in hearing like, oh, we're gonna make a prequel to it, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna love that. That sounds fantastic. And then I played it, and like you can hear the little like flute from Jurassic Park.
That's the moment the child and you died.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this I was lied to. And then like, I mean, to be fair, it was by Microsoft. I should have known better. It's kind of stupid on my part, but yeah, like it's really disappointing.
It's fitting to talk about us all having our own journey of kind of maturing and becoming immune to hype, and part of that is getting betrayed. part of that is in games industry hurting you in some small way, and then you're like, I remember that, and now I know Stove Hot. Because mine is also a sequel to one of my favorite games. My biggest disappointment, I can't think past it, so it has to be this one, was Mass Effect Andromeda. And it was just such a... I can't believe you did this to me. Like in media, two of my biggest disappointments ever are probably like Mass Effect Andromeda and like Rise of Skywalker, the newest Star Wars movie, where I'm just like, I didn't know being this bad was even in the cards. You have certain...
Watch the prequels?
No, even the prequels are on that level. Like there's a certain aspect of
I don't know about that.
when you engage in certain media, this kind of goes back to the Skyward Sword destruction, where people discussion where people talk about it being like a horrible game, but it's really just like moderately disappointing to some Zelda fans, and that's like the worst you can really say about it in some cases. Like when you have certain franchises that are a certain quality level, there's like a acceptable range of what you think is even possible, and like the worst case scenario feels like it still wouldn't be that bad, because they're just like, oh yeah, that's the one, we don't play that, we don't talk about that one much, we don't talk about Mario 2 very much, or whatever the hell, like what you consider to be like a disappointing thing in a good franchise. But no, like that we were in a car and somebody went to hit the brakes and their foot went through the pedal and into the asphalt of the road, and like the impossible, like something, a barrier that you didn't think could be broken was broken, and like that was so beyond what could have been possibly bad that it's like I grew as a person a little bit.
Sounds like there's a lot of pain there.
Yeah. I definitely have a similar...
get it out.
I've had a decade of learning how to express my feelings.
I definitely have a similar experience with Oblivion, but I don't think that, because I really enjoyed Oblivion when it came out, and then I grew as I played it, and then understood that it was a problem because the game
your disappointment was going back to a thing you liked before.
No. It was as I played it back in 2006. I bought a new computer to play it and all that, and for the first few hours I was just enjoying it, and then I realized what the limitations of the game, and it soured me completely for AAA RPGs in general. Oblivion is one of the reasons why it took me so long to play Dragon Age.
Oh yeah, but Bethesda's done a lot of damage to my faith in AAA RPGs.
But I think it's not my biggest disappointment, because I went back to it recently, and it's got a lot of limitations, but it's also got some interesting redeeming features.
It's quaint, and it's not Skyrim.
Yeah, it's not the worst game in the world. Skyrim. My biggest disappointment is also, it took me a little while to realize, but I realized it. It's a recent RPG called Pathfinder Kingmaker, and
you're about to say Planescape Torment.
No, Planescape Torment. Pathfinder Kingmaker presents very well because it's got all the trappings of a traditional role-playing game with all the systems and all that. But the more you play it, the more you realize it's shallow and it doesn't have anything there. And I just soured me completely for that company. I'm sorry. And it was very disappointing to finish the game and look back and be like, wow.
What could have been?
No, it couldn't. It couldn't be. I could go into detail, but it's complicated. So
How about you, Gold?
Do you want me to go into detail?
What is your...
Well, let me share mine.
Oh.
Which is it was definitely the original Fable.
Oh,
I think I was
interesting.
I
feel like I was promised I feel like I was promised Skyrim, and then I got the original Fable.
I
just it was supposed to be forever game, I was going to have Halo as, multiplayer, jump in whenever I want to, and then like a relaxing world to just expand into forever. And it was such an on rails RPG adjacent.
So hard.
It was so disappointing, just how easy and straightforward everything was, and how short it was. And it wasn't this big open world with so many things to explore. And it was just walking from zone to zone, picking up a better sword. And I think that was a painful. I think if more people suffered that painful experience, they would have been prepared for the Cyberpunk.
We have to sit everyone down when they're starting gaming and make them read. It's
so right.
They have to read the Game Informer pre-release.
You're so right, because
the thing about Fable, where Peter Molyneux promises that there's so much in-depth camping mechanics that you can get sick in the cold if you're not warm enough, and you get infected by the Balverine curse and turn into a monster, and just make them read all that pre-release stuff and then play the game. Because I did that, I lived that. I've told Andrew that I think before, where I was just I let myself get killed by Balverines 10 times in a row, be maybe it's just a random chance. And it's no, you can't get it. There's no Balverine curse in this game. You just lied.
You see, I never played Fable because of Oblivion.
A werewolf ever.
I got burned by Oblivion, and I decided I saw through Fable before it came out, and then everybody was like, and I was like, yeah, and I never played it, any of the three.
Think someone would do that? Just go on the stage of E3 and lie?
Yeah, just hurt children.
Especially Peter Molyneux, so famous for not lying.
I mean, well,
we didn't know yet. That was the first.
I think we did.
No one knew about. Barely anyone played Black and White.
Black and White.
Yeah, Black and White too. Right. People knew from Black and White too. I'm not just from there.
Fable was a breakthrough on numbers. I think that was the big.
Oh yeah.
Everyone knows he lies now, and then he did it 4 more times at least.
Wait a minute. Fable came out before Oblivion. I couldn't. My memory is bad.
No, Fable came out Fable came out a long time ago.
Yeah, it's 2004. Oblivion is 2006, I think.
Oh, I know. Oblivion's a 360 game.
Yeah. It's still like a release.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's ancient.
I think so.
Chicken Chaser. That's all I remember. All I remember is Chicken Chaser. And do you want a sister or a sword? The only real choice in the entire game is sister or sword.
I remember playing the game again. I was like, oh yeah, I should probably check Fable out again, because I remember playing it a long time ago, and walking out of the door from the temple where you grew up, and it was like, I don't have chicken chase. I was like, oh no, I forgot all about this.
Yeah. All right, I think it's about time to wrap up. Let everyone go. But this has been good, everybody. Thanks for coming by. If you have questions
for inviting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you have questions for the podcast, you can send them to dialogchoicespodcast@gmail.com. And yeah. Thanks for watching like always, guys, and I'll see you next time.
Don't buy hype games.
Have a good night.